2 years ago is when we started. We had stewards that would adopt the bump out, that would be responsible for weeding and watering. And we had the Milwaukee Garden Club, we had the Milwaukee Rotary, we had the local church, we had Milwaukee Floral and Garden that all agreed to be stewards to these groups. So it really was
Amazing.
very much community. So we planted and then watched to see what would happen in a year. Some plants really loved it, some plants not so much. So we found out what plant was right for that area and would plant more. And after we knew that this was really something that could work and was working, we decided to mark it as a Milwaukee Pollinator Pathway.
From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is PolliNation, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Often when we think about pollinator habitat, we envision things that take place on an enormous scale. Take, for instance, some of the Farm Bill programs that are administered through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. We're really talking here about programs that are measured in the millions of acres. But there is a lot to be said about initiatives that pay attention to the details at the local level. In this regard, I was heartened to hear about a new initiative in the city of Milwaukee, Oregon, that sprung up literally from the grassroots. This week, we hear from Colleen Rockwell, who is the Rotary Club of Milwaukee's Environmental Committee Chair. Working through the Rotary and other community groups, they managed to establish the second certified pollinator pathway in Oregon, the first being in Bend. In this episode, we hear about how that initiative got off the ground, what they have learned, and how other local organizations might go about following their lead. Speaking about the Portland area, though, I want to plug a fundraiser for the Oregon Bee Atlas that is taking place by the Portland waterfront on November 14th. It's called the Bees, Bottles, and Biodiversity fundraiser. It's going to be a great evening of Oregon bee-friendly wine and the unveiling of some newly found bees that the Atlas has discovered in Oregon. All proceeds go to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment, and you can find out more about the event from the Oregon State University Extension website and register there. But enough of that, let's beat a pathway back to Milwaukee to hear about local pollinator habitat this week on PolliNation.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here talking
From Milwaukee,
about pollinators
Oregon.
and native plants. That's right, all the way on the Pacific Northwest.
Well, why don't you just start by telling us about, how does someone from Milwaukee, Oregon get interested in pollinator conservation in the first place?
Well, as a child, we spent a lot of time with my grandparents who lived up in the wilderness on Wildcat Mountain, and we would take walks after dinner, and my grandfather would point out the native plants. Then I started working, and that kind of fell on the wayside. And I retired, and I thought, wow, what should I do that really interests me? So I took the Master Gardening class through Oregon State Extension and was introduced to a lot of different things. One was native plants.
I think there's been, I was thinking recently in the Master Gardeners, there's been this push on native plants and trying to incorporate them. But even more broadly, I think about like the Backyard Habitat Program in Portland, there's a lot of interest in shifting away from, the regular ornamentals and bringing more native plants into your backyard.
We are very fortunate here in Milwaukee to have not only the Backyard Habitat Program, which encourages a percentage of your yard to be natives, but we also have the Xerces Society, which is worldwide, which does conservation and has several different pollinator programs. And then, of course, the Master Gardener program. It's not just natives, there's ornamentals too, and there's a place for everything. But I think the reason that it's becomes utmost in everyone's mind, the pollinators, is because there has been a decline of native pollinators, and they're very important to our ecosystem. Biodiversity is so important. They're sustainable, they're resilient to changes in temperature and weather, and it just seems
And
like the
there's
right thing to
like
do.
as you said when you started with way back when you were young, they're just intriguing as well.
Well, I think about my grandfather who was born in 1899, and I think about what he saw around him. And what I'm looking at now, 2 generations later, is very different than what he saw as a boy and a young man and as an adult. Our landscape is very different, and it does have an effect on not only people, but also wildlife,
That's well
pollinators,
said.
birds around us.
I'm so excited to have learned, and the occasion for this podcast is Bend was the first community in Oregon to be certified as a pollinator pathway, but there's a second one now in Milwaukee. Where did that initiative come from?
Well, there were, as we've talked about, pollinators really are foremost and they're up front and center. And I had done the master gardening program, was introduced to natives there, but I also had joined the Rotary Club of Milwaukie, Oregon, and they had a Operation PolliNation. And so it just seemed to all kind of fit together, maybe taking care of a couple things by one act, and it just fit. And so the Milwaukee pollinator pathway started with, we on our main street we have these bump outs that are publicly owned, and they are traffic regulators to kind of ease traffic between a sidewalk and a street. And they are publicly owned, but they are to be maintained by the business owners, and they have enough to do. And the our local historic Milwaukee NDA decided, well, let's help out. Let's pick up trash. Let's weed and do things. And I suggested, well, hey, let's plant native plants, help the pollinators, and then put our little dot on the map. And, we are a pollinator pathway. And that
Huh.
happened in April. We had a big kickoff for that. Um, and it got noticed by a lot of people and has led to others really nice things happening. It's a really
That's
good sense of
fantastic. Can you
community.
tell us a little bit about what those bump outs look like this summer? I was imagining this establishment year, and it's
Right. So, the pollinator pathway has 4 areas that they remove invasives, plant natives, no pesticides, and then to spread awareness. So, the first thing that we did was we took out the shrubs that were there. We actually had to use a winch from a,
oh,
a truck to get those out because there were some large established shrubs, but we were able to rehome them. We didn't kill
uh-huh.
anything, we just rehomed them. From there, we had looked at the area to see, when the sunlight's there, what direction, and then we used some local resources to decide what to plant. We have a lot of different native nurseries around us. One right down the street that we use quite a bit, Twin Flower Natives, a new
They
business
are
started
amazing.
by 2 women, and they have been really, yes, they have been very helpful in saying, we can get this plant for you. I would give them a list and say, hey, it's drought tolerant, it's evergreen for eye appeal, it blooms this time of year, and they would just go for it. And they would text me, Colleen, your order's ready. And it
The
was
thing to
really
say as
nice.
well is Kim is a
We
master melitologist, so is like a very very deep into the pollinator world.
Yes, I just love working with Kim, and I did know that you had been acquainted, and she had taken the Bee
Oh yeah,
City
she came down.
Atlas
We had a
training. Is that
conversation
right?
about you that came up. She was working through some obscure genera of bee, and is like, there's this pollinator pathway in Milwaukee that you should check out.
Well, and so what it's done is we organized a big work group with various organizations like Milwaukee Rotary, the historic Milwaukee NDA, worked with Kim and Heather with the Twin Flower Natives, and we planted plants. And we did this 2 years ago is when we started. We had stewards that would adopt the bump out that would be responsible for weeding and watering. And we had the Milwaukee Garden Club, we had the Milwaukee Rotary, we had the local church, we had Milwaukee Floral and Garden that all agreed to be stewards to these groups. So it it really was a
Amazing.
very much community. So we planted and then watch to see what would happen in a year. Some plants really loved it, some plants not so much. So we found out what plant was right for that area and would plant more. And after we knew that this was really something that could work and was working, we decided to mark it as a Milwaukee pollinator pathway
I
with the
love the
pollinator
way in
pathway
which
program.
this brought all these community organizations together in a very public way, and something that everybody will see as they're kind of passing through the main strip of town. I love that whole sensibility of this project.
And so sometimes when I'm down there, if I'm weeding, a passerby will stop and say, "Hey, that looks really nice." And it's a good feeling to have. We did have what you would say a business plan. The first year we planted, see, what was going to happen. If it was successful, then to have it designated as a pollinator pathway, and also to move beyond just Main Street, to go out and actually extend that
Oh.
pathway throughout all of
You
Milwaukee.
were
And
telling
that's
me we
where
were
we're
we were
at right
talking a
now.
little bit previously, and you were mentioning, for example, that if a homeowner wanted to get involved and extend that pathway from Main Street out into the neighborhood, there's even like signs that they can put on their lawn.
Yes. So the pollinator pathway,
Oh,
there's a
there it is.
national website, and then we also have a local website. Here's the sign. So a homeowner can go onto the website. There's a button, join the pathway, and they can actually list their address as a pollinator pathway. And so when they do that, they get a sign here provided by Milwaukee Rotary to put on their yard and to spread awareness of what they're doing. It does say native plants and pesticide free. And it really opens the conversation for others as they're walking by. Hey, why does Sally have a
Oh,
sign?
fantastic.
It's a really great
I
thing.
was really curious. I was thinking bump outs as a starting point is it's a hard, there's traffic, there's dirt, and it's dry. What were some of the plants that did well in that
Oh,
setting?
the plants that did well, Oregon grape does well. When you mention the bump outs, they are completely surrounded by concrete, and most of them are don't have trees. It's just brutal sun, no water, and they also get driven over.
Oh
There are
no.
tire tracks through our bump outs. And yes, and so we added some big rocks as some deterrent. We added some logs, which is also good for a pollinator pathway for habitat. Other things, Kinnickinnick does well, yarrow, Douglas aster. We have a wide variety of plants because the steward for each
Oh.
bump out gets to choose what plants they want to plant. There is not a set planting guide for these bump outs. So it's really very individual. You take ownership of that bump out and
And
you want it
I
to
was
look
thinking that all of
nice.
those plants as
And
well. There's a wide range, and you get shrub, high shrub, small shrub. I was with Douglas Aster. You get a nice, probably stopped blooming just a few weeks ago, but all those plants are just nice, tough plants, and that well, I think the lesson is that one doesn't need to have, even in a kind of harsh environment, there's still some plants you can spec out that are native that will do okay there.
There are. For the first 3 years, plants really do need water. And unfortunately, last summer, I was not able to make sure they had water. And we had plants that still thrive. Douglas aster did, penstemons did. They are just beautiful when they bloom. Right now, we have buckwheat that is blooming. And you want to have plants that bloom in succession so that they provide food year long for the pollinators. That can be a little tough here in Oregon, but with kinnikinick, which has berries and things like that, we pretty much are able to provide some type of food and obviously a habitat for our pollinators, which are mostly ground dwelling. Our bees are ground dwelling, and so we can also provide berries for birds. And it's been a nice journey. Sometimes a
Yeah.
struggle when you see tire prints in your tracks and your bump out, but it's a harsh environment, and
So
they really
so
are
let's say you're
thriving.
a resident of Milwaukee, you're inspired, you somehow were hidden under a rock and didn't know this was going on. How do you get involved? But also, let's say you're another community in Oregon and you similarly want to take advantage of something like the bump outs or some other area that's open to the public to get involved. Yeah, how do you get involved there?
As far as residents, we do table at a lot of events, and we have little contact cards, we have QR codes, various things for them to contact the website, send an email. And it's amazing. We have been doing this for a year, but this was the first year that our second year is when we decided we're going to go public with it. And the amount of support that we've gotten, emails and phone calls, texts about, hey, I want to put my little area on the map, and we just say click that button, say join, and you can have a sign too. And also, Milwaukee, we live next to the Willamette River, and on the other side, so we're the east side. We were contacted by the city of Beaverton. They want to do some type of pollinator pathway in their area. So they traveled across the river, came to Milwaukee. We did a walkabout downtown, showed them, what's working, what hasn't worked, what resources we use. We do use one that I think you know about quite well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a planting guide. I believe you were involved in developing this. Also, we
Oh, the
use
Meadowscape.
the
Yeah, that's
native
great.
plants
The
of the
Metro.
Willamette Valley. This is what I
Mhm.
consider the Bible for planting guides. It can be daunting to somebody to say, "Well, I have an area, I'm willing to do this. How do I do that?" And there are so many resources out there to help people decide what to plant, whether it be a publication, whether it be something on the website, and even just going to your native nursery and talking to the people there. Everyone has a
it is
lot of
slightly dangerous
information.
going to a native nursery. I always seem to like fill up the car even though I was just going in for something simple. It's so wonderful. There's so much diversity out there, and you run out of room.
Right. And one of the things with the bump outs that's maybe a little different than your at home garden is that we do plant densely to provide
Oh.
visual effect for people walking by. We do try to plant in threes so that there is a very definite area of
Ah.
yarrow, a very definite area of Douglas aster, so it's not all spread
Mhm.
out. It's kind of a concentrated area, and that helps the pollinators. It provides a landing path for them, a visual area that they can see. And I've also been told that once they know that there's a food source here, that they will keep coming back
I
to
think
that
that's
food
great
source.
advice, and I think all having in those harsh environments as well, just having multiple plants, just in case one gets driven over.
Yeah, we also
Oh,
try
good.
to use grasses a lot to be very beautiful, especially when they have their stalks, they're swaying in the wind. We try all different things, and I have one bump out right now that is not really up to my standards. And I thought at first, oh, native ferns, because there was shade. Well, there's also a tree and it's taking all that water that is there naturally. And so it's a journey. You just keep trying something. And when you find it,
It does
it's like,
strike me that
oh,
this is the
this
way
is
that you
it.
build local expertise too. When you have the opportunity to be involved in some of these initiatives, you try things, you now have this knowledge that, you don't have to travel across, you don't have to contact a national nonprofit or the state university. You can just walk down the street and say, yeah, what do I do? Have you seen this problem before?
And that is so true because Beaverton, we gave Beaverton the officials that came and also the other nonprofits with them. We gave them all the resources, and what I found is that they sent me an email later saying, "But what did you plant?" And so we do make a little diagram because we knew that in the future someone's going to say, "What is here?" and what we use for our planogram so far. So we do that. The stewards, we ask each one of them, give us a diagram of your area so that when we get these questions, we're able to answer
This is
them,
amazing, and I
be
guess just to
resourceful.
end things off, I just wanted to hear a little bit about your vision of where this goes. This has only been not even a year of being a pollinator pathway. What do you see? I guess one of the visions is Portland is one big pathway.
Yes, I'm pretty satisfied to work within Milwaukee. There is such a big area, and we are moving further east, which is a goal. But we also had, as part of our business plan, to be recognized as a Bee City USA, which is a Xerces initiative. And there are surrounding communities of Milwaukee that were listed as Bee City USA. Milwaukee had not been. And so we talked that the Bee City USA is more of a government side, whereas Pollinator Pathway is a community side. They work well together. But Bee City does policies to protect the pollinators. And that is what we're working on right now. We're very, very
That's
close to
super
being
exciting.
certified.
And I have one last question for you, I guess.
It
What,
is.
yeah,
Yes.
everybody's probably wondering, what are your favorite native plants?
I really like Douglas aster. It's very, very hardy. It goes to about 3 to 4 feet, which we had to work with when with traffic. You have to be able to see. I do like Oregon grape. That is so, so hardy. There's 3 different varieties, any size or height you want. And also as an annual, I like Clarkia. It is
I
so
love Clarky
pretty
as
and
well, and
vibrant.
I'm looking forward. It's sort of sad now that there's just these stalks left, but I know those seeds are tumbled down, and
Yeah.
somehow they must be germinating at now or in the spring, and we're gonna have that.
They will when that temperature of that soil gets to 55, or they will. They'll
Well,
start
I really
germinating and
appreciate
it's
you taking the time
amazing.
to tell us about this exciting initiative in Milwaukee. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.